I guess I need your help. I got something tied up I need gone. Those words were texted to an Oklahoma woman named Jennifer Moore Porgo from her friend, Matthew Onsimo Armstrong. Jennifer drove up to Armstrong's remote property in Seminole County, Oklahoma, perhaps assuming that she was needed for a quick errand. But when she arrived at the modest home, surrounded by the woods on Road 363, Jennifer was greeted by the sound of a woman's blood-curdling scream in the distance. The cries were coming from Nicole Marlene Owl, a woman who had spent the better part of the past day tied to a tree. Matthew Armstrong and his roommate, Nicholas Faulkner, were responsible. 2 days earlier, Armstrong had confronted Nicole with allegations that she had stolen $200, marijuana, and about 3.5 grams of meth, and hidden the stash somewhere in the woods. When she denied it, Armstrong tied her down with extension cords and left to retrieve his father's SKS rifle from a property nearby. But his rage was about much more than just the missing items. For you see, Armstrong was a part of something bigger, a prison gang called the Indian Brotherhood, widely considered to be the most dangerous and violent gang within Oklahoma prisons. Like most prison gangs, the Indian Brotherhood's lifeblood is contraband smuggling, and Armstrong was one of the many members on the outside tasked with keeping the supply chain moving. His crucial role in the gang involved stockpiling drugs, tobacco, cell phones for others to smuggle into Oklahoma prison yards controlled by the Brotherhood, and to protect the gang's property from rivals and thieves. Nicole Owl had now placed herself at odds with not just Armstrong, but a vast criminal enterprise with a chilling history of murder and mayhem. Now her life hung in the balance. If this scene sounds petrifying to you, you'll soon learn that it is simply one of a string of similar crimes that have earned the Brotherhood its reputation as a gang perfectly willing to kill not just rivals, but innocent women and unborn children who simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We'll be giving you an insider's view of the Indian Brotherhood as told by those who witnessed its violent legacy firsthand. It's a story told through the lens of a gang that thrives in some of the most debaucherous conditions known to man, connecting the world of sleazy meth markets on the Great Plains with the supposedly glamorous lifestyle found in high-end Nevada brothels. This is the Killer Chronicles. Throughout the United States, there is no other place that has become more synonymous with Native American history and subjugation than Oklahoma. Formerly known as simply Indian Territory, it was the destination of the Trail of Tears, ground zero for the near extinction of millions of bison during the 19th century, and home to dozens of tribes and tribal nations, many of which were forced there through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. To this day, native tribes are prevalent in Oklahoma, much more so than most other places, which has created unique challenges regarding jurisdictional issues and sovereignty. It should be no surprise, then, that Oklahoma is also home to one of the largest and most powerful native prison gangs, which has spread not just into the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, but also nationwide, as a groundbreaking Supreme Court case drastically changed how crimes in native lands can be prosecuted. The Indian Brotherhood uses the initials IBH, or the corresponding numbers 928, which are commonly tattooed on members' bodies, often with feather-style letters. They sport tattoos of traditional indigenous face markings and often refer to themselves or one another as warriors as well as brothers. The gang is a constant target of law enforcement, but surprisingly few details about its inner workings have been made public. One declassified DEA document from 2017 describes it as an extremely compartmentalized gang, with at least 329 known members, divided into 29 subgroups, known as tribes. Its leadership consists of a 5-person high council that votes on major issues, and each prison is controlled by a war chief. Like most prison gangs, it is built around the concept of self-protection while incarcerated. The IBH is believed to have been founded in the 1990s, and has been expanding ever since. The 29 tribes listed by DEA investigators have names that reference well-known Native civil rights activists or important events in Native American history, with examples to include the Crazy Snake Tribe, a reference to the last Indian uprising of 1909, the Dog Soldiers, referencing Cheyenne military societies, and the Skinwalker Tribe, a callback to a supernatural being in Navajo folklore. Despite these empowering and culturally significant titles, the main functions of the IBH seem centered on drug sales, contraband smuggling, and shocking violence that frequently targets women. In 2016, an alleged member of the IBH High Council was implicated in a massive meth trafficking ring, organized by another member named Cody McClendon. Federal prosecutors said both men would use contraband cell phones to run a statewide drug and smuggling ring behind bars, with couriers making deals for as much as $26,750 at a time. According to the indictment, the DEA got wind of all of this when a courier named Amber Claflin was arrested in West Siloam Springs, Oklahoma, for having meth and attempting to spend a counterfeit $100 bill, and agreed to introduce Cody McClendon to an undercover drug bureau agent, leading to a massive wiretap of Cody and other IBH associates' phones. This case was a fairly open and shut affair, and didn't stray beyond what one expects from your typical prison gang. But as we'll see, many IBH-related prosecutions have been much, much darker. Damian Martin's last week on Earth started with a stroke of good luck. He won big at a local casino in Oklahoma, to the tune of several $1,000s. So when he turned up missing from McIntosh County on September 21st, 2017, many people assumed it was foul play by someone who wished to part Martin from his newfound cash. These fears were thrown into overdrive when an Eufaula man noticed a foul odor from a metal shed in his backyard and called police. And the officers came to discover Martin's decomposing body in a box marked Christmas tree. The man who reported this grisly discovery had a stepson named William Clayton Brown, a Choctaw Nation member, who was also a part of the Indian Brotherhood, and who would turn out was one of the last men to see Martin alive. When police began to query Brown's friends and family, a bizarre and twisted story emerged. It turned out that Brown and Martin were friends, and that they'd decided it would be a nice idea to spend some of Martin's newfound money on crank and go on a multi-day bender, while hanging out with Brown's sister, Lacey Watson, who was casually dating Martin. At one point, Watson decided to take a bath while Brown and Martin engaged in an informal freestyle rap battle. While she was nude in the tub, the two men burst in. Lacey, apparently not wanting her brother to stare at her while she took a bath, told Brown to leave, but let Martin stay. So Brown got a knife, kicked in the door, and stabbed Martin in the brain. He would later claim he believed that Martin was going to attack his sister, an allegation that seemed to have no basis whatsoever. Brown's lawyers decided to blame not Brown or Martin, but the meth, stating that meth equals death, and quoting a Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson song that explains how, with drugs,
the low is always lower than the high.
One of the oddest details of his trial was Brown apparently confessing to a jail deputy named Timothy Mark Goodwin, who was the uncle of Brown's girlfriend, and who later became chief of police of Eufaula. At trial, Brown's lawyers described him as deeply remorseful. What they didn't say was that by then, he'd committed several more stabbings in jail, attacked deputies, and killed another person. The victim, Mark Lawhead, was inextricably placed in a cell with Brown despite being a convicted rapist and a member of the Savage Boys gang, which rivals the IBH. After strangling Lawhead in brutal fashion by stuffing a bag down his throat, Brown mailed out a letter to his girlfriend stating, "I smoked a Savage Boy last night. On God, I did." He also stabbed a fellow IBH member who openly expressed surprise, telling police that he and Brown were both in good standing with the gang, and there was no apparent reason for the attack. Brown was later convicted of both murders. It was Valentine's Day 2020, and Tommy Gouge had every reason in the world to be happy. He had been released from jail for a domestic violence arrest just a few days earlier, and now he was returning home to his loving wife, Stephanie, and his young child and 2 stepchildren. But on this day, Gouge called police to casually explain that he'd stabbed and beaten his wife to death and would meet the cops out front with the kids in the yard. Police in Clearview, Oklahoma, drove up to Gouge's home and took him into custody, where he explained the murder had to do with his wife sending ass pics to another man. But what seemed to be a straightforward case of domestic violence took a turn into gang politics, as Tommy Gouge then proceeded to write and sign a confession letter bringing IBH business into the killing. He wrote, quote, "She was trying to set me up to get killed by Indian Brotherhood because I decided to get out and move on the right path. I found her texting an IBH member saying I had a green light to be killed." Gouge later pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. That brings us to the tragic life of Matthew Onsimo Armstrong. Born into the Seminole Nation, Armstrong's childhood was marred by pediatric seizures, abandonment, and abuse at the hands of his grandfather, where he'd been beaten or locked in a closet as a form of punishment. As a young man, he turned to his father for guidance, and that's how he was introduced to the Indian Brotherhood. By 2017, he was a full-fledged member, entrusted with a crucial role in a prison contraband smuggling ring, and working with a prospect named Nicholas Faulkner, aka Pony Boy. The two were staying together in Armstrong's remote property when Faulkner met Nicole Owl at a party in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and agreed to let her stay with them after learning she'd been kicked out of her prior residence. Just a few days into her stay, Nicole was seen jumping out of Armstrong's window with a tote bag and running into the woods. When Armstrong realized his drugs and cash were missing, and naturally connecting the 2 dots, Nicole denied stealing the items, but said it was possible she'd lost them in the woods. That's when they forced her out into the forest and tied her to a tree, which Faulkner would later insist was not meant to torment her, but rather explained it was a native tradition to tie people to trees when they needed to get sober. By the end of Nicole's horrifying ordeal, Armstrong had made up his mind. He drove to his father Jimmy's home, retrieved the SKS rifle, and in the presence of witnesses, shot Nicole once in the chest and once in the head. Then he turned to Faulkner and coldly stated, "No more girls at the house." The group left Nicole's body tied to a tree for another day, before burying her in a shallow grave underneath 160 pounds of concrete they purchased at a local store. Jennifer Morpurgo was a participant in all of this, but not exactly a willing one. Understandably afraid for her life after what she'd seen. Once she was away from the 2 men, she took the first chance she got to call the police. Both men were arrested, and they would go on to confess. But when authorities researched Matthew Onsimo Armstrong, they realized he participated in a murder before. In 2015, 2 people in their 20s, named Joseph Bounds and Summer Goki, were shot and killed in a vehicle behind a Walmart in Seminole County, Oklahoma. The perpetrator was later found, arrested, and convicted in what police said was a dispute over meth and a dispute over another criminal plot. But before police arrested a suspect, the Indian Brotherhood tried to solve Bounds' murder on their own and assigned Armstrong along with a man named John Knight, aka Kuzo, to do some detective work. They were told to go to the home of a man named Scotty Candler and question him about his possible involvement in the murders. Things went awry quickly. Both Matthew and Kuzo showed up to Candler's with guns, with Matthew firing shots at Candler's guard dogs, while Knight allegedly went into the home. Candler ended up dead in his bed, shot in the head. Afterwards, they disposed of their weapons and got a ride out of there from Armstrong's dad. The three got away with the murder for 2 years. But while all of this IBH violence certainly shocked the conscience of Oklahomans, there was one crime in particular that changed the way people look at the Indian Brotherhood. It was a mini massacre of 2009 that came to be known as the Cat House Murders, and created shockwaves that are still being felt to this day. Casey Barrientos needed a bodyguard, and there were plenty of reasons why. The year was 2009, and Casey was making a name for himself as a local supplier of marijuana, meth, and cocaine in the Oklahoma City area. But he was also affiliated with major figures in the local sex trade, where the lines between stripping and prostitution can get a little blurry. Casey was known to some by the nickname Diablo, a menacing-sounding title that somewhat contradicted his reputation as a charming socialite who liked to sell drugs and throw parties out of the same home. Casey's trap house at 1511 Southwest 56th Street was, quote, a place where men carried guns, women often walked around naked, marijuana bricks were stacked in the kitchen, and $100,000 in cash was usually on a coffee table. Casey flaunted his illicit wealth, not just by displaying cash, but also wearing a distinctive custom chain with a skull as the centerpiece. With all of this money and jewelry, Casey Barrientos was a target. And that's where a cage fighter known as Hooligan came in. Before David Tyner was known as Hooligan, he earned the title of Stan. It stood for Shit That Ain't Nothing. Because, since he was a young adult, Tyner would always look for ways to one-up whatever the last guy had just talked about. It got to the point where people came to expect a line of BS out of him, and hardly anything he said was taken literally. In high school, at his hometown of Locust Grove, Oklahoma, Tyner hadn't excelled at much, but he thrived on wrestling mats, making a name for himself in national competitions and earning a path to college through competitive sport. But a poor academic performance got him booted from the University of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and a stint at a college in Muskogee, Oklahoma hadn't gone much better. With his future in question, Tyner turned toward a life that offered him the possibility to back up his outlandish stories of adventure and accomplishment with real action. He signed up for the Marines, just as the United States was prepping for what would become the decades-long wars in the Middle East. Among his fellow Marines in Iraq, Tyner would make his homicidal thoughts known. He once stuck an M16 into his own mouth in front of them, and he would also describe frequent nightmares of what he referred to as black thoughts, whereby an imaginary friend would speak to him with instructions to kill people. Most of all, though, he talked about how cool it would be to one day become a hitman for the mob. Like his college career, his stint in the military hit a wall. So Tyner once again turned to his first love. He became an MMA cage fighter, and for the first time in a long time, he found success. He posted a 6-1 record, with all 6 victories coming in the first round. But he also made a life-changing contact with another fighter people knew as Phil DZ. His real name was Denny Phillips. You might say he was in the recruiting business. Denny Phillips was a career criminal. There was no other way to put it. He was into mixed martial arts, and this was far from the only form of fighting he'd experienced during his rough life. He'd fought in the streets, fought the police, and spent 10 years fighting others in prison while serving a sentence for assault, defrauding a pawn store. He'd even once been arrested for trying to make a mobile meth lab in the trunk of his own car. While incarcerated, he joined the Indian Brotherhood, rising the ranks to become war chief. After being released from prison, he was expected to find suitable prospects to join the gang, as well as to assist with raking in cash through drug sales. In David Hooligan Tyner, Denny found a potential brother. Both men were Cherokee. They were both from Oklahoma, and Tyner's desire to fit in somewhere seemed to coincide well with the Indian Brotherhood structure. Soon, Tyner was at Denny's beck and call. One of his first jobs was to protect Casey Diablo Barrientos from any potential harm. The reason for this was simple. Barrientos and Denny weren't just friends, they were partners in the drug business. Tyner and Casey began spending a lot of time together, to the point where Tyner practically lived at the Southwest 56th Street home. Then, the relationship between Casey and Denny started to devolve. Brooke Phillips, who had no relation to Denny, was raised by her two aunts, as her mother would lose custody and go on to make headlines for allegedly attempting to cook meth in a Walmart bathroom. By 17, Brooke was a single mom with big dreams of acquiring fame and fortune, but constantly battling her own worse impulses. After turning 18, with her goal of becoming a nurse apparently dashed, Brooke found a job at a strip club called Bosco's. The pay was good, with Brooke being able to make as much as $1,000 on a good night. By now, she was into party drugs and caught in a lifestyle that required her to pretend to enjoy the company of men who were oftentimes paying her because they couldn't attract women without a pocket full of cash. One media report recounted this. Brooke, known as Hayden Brooks in the business, had everyone's attention when on the phallic stripper's pole, which she would envelop like a snake. "I worked at night trips and I'm cute," she said, and got the job. 2 years prior, her mother had been on the same stage, dancing to feed her methamphetamine addiction. During this time of her life, Brooke made 2 contacts that would change everything for her. One was a man named Jose Fierro, a local guy who owned a business that arranged bachelor parties. The second was with a woman named Shelley Duchelle, who shared Brooks's life vision and told Brooke about a rare opportunity on the other side of the country. And that's how, by age 21, Brooke came to work at a little building near Carson City, Nevada, called the Moonlight Bunny Ranch. In a country where prostitution is almost universally outlawed, the Moonlight Bunny Ranch is one of America's few exceptions, where paying clients can fornicate with the person of their choice in a completely above-board and legal fashion. The ranch was owned by a man named Dennis Hoff, who, in the world of legalized prostitution, is what Hugh Hefner was to topless magazines. Or to put it more bluntly, the P.T. Barnum of pimps. Hoff had been a connoisseur of brothels before he bought the ranch and became its owner. But he wasn't exactly shy about his habit of dating much younger women who worked there. But Hoff had instincts that went beyond the simple mantra of sex sells, and sought to exploit the curiosity of those who aren't directly a part of that world at all. Hoff was able to successfully pitch an HBO show called Cat House, which not only delved into the lives of sex workers at the ranch, but which also included racy footage that bordered on outright pornography. Brooke found herself a brief part in that show, including a notable scene where she masturbated on camera as other women looked on. All the while she was working at the ranch as a legal sex worker. It was hardly putting out for peanuts. The Moonlight Ranch might not have been a place to earn a wholesome reputation, but it was a good place to rake in cash. And Brooke was proving to be a major draw. She earned $20,000 for a single overnight party, and even went on the Tyra Banks show to promote Cat House. Then, at age 22, Brooke stepped away from it all. She returned to Oklahoma with a new goal in mind. She wanted to be a mother again. Brooke and Hoff dated for a few months, and he took an interest in her desire for motherhood. One news report from Oklahoma said he, quote, arranged for her to get pregnant. And that's where Jose Fierro re-entered Brooks's life. By now, Fierro had started his own entertainment business called Spanish Fly, but he had plenty of contacts in the drug world too. Jose was successful. He'd been able to purchase a home in Oklahoma City. It was at 1511 Southwest 56th Street, where his lifelong friend, Casey Diablo Barrientos, came to live. This brings us to 2009. Brooke Phillips was pregnant and still living in Oklahoma. Casey Barrientos was still in the drug game, but without his former bodyguard David Tyner, who had left the area on the orders of Denny Phillips. Denny was living in Salina, a decent drive away from Oklahoma City. But his friendship with Casey was a thing of the past. They'd argued about money, not just in the marijuana trade, but also over car and motorcycle purchases that had come into dispute. Now, Denny had had it with Casey's perceived disrespect. He made up his mind. He was moving into the drug business in Oklahoma City, and step one was to take Casey Barrientos completely out of the picture. Denny Phillips and David Tyner made one more fateful decision. They hatched a plan to rob and kill Casey, and didn't seem to mind discussing this plan in front of their girlfriends. In preparation for this murder, David Tyner was given permission to receive his first IBH prospect tattoo. In at least one of these conversations, Denny made it clear no eyewitnesses were to be left behind, no matter what it took. David Tyner assembled his crew, recruiting two men named Jonathan Cochran and Russell Lee Hogshooter to assist. On November 8th, 2009, everything came to a head. Tyner got into a white Pontiac Grand Prix, picked up Cochran and Hogshooter in a town near Tulsa. Altogether, they had a .40 caliber handgun and two .380 pistols, plus two knives. Denny followed them in a Dodge Charger, but stayed away from the actual house. On the way, Hogshooter and Cochran figured the best course of action would be to smoke some meth inside the moving vehicle as they got closer to Oklahoma City. When they arrived, Tyner dropped the pair off a short distance away. Then he parked up front, under the guise of checking on a shipment of drugs Casey was supposed to receive and looking to speak with someone known as Yellow Dog. Who he found instead was Jose Fierro, in the makings of a party involving 10 to 15 people, including a clearly pregnant Brooke Phillips. As the night turned to morning, people began to trickle out of the party house. And at around 2 a.m., Casey showed up with two women, one named Jennifer Ermey, and another named Milagros Barrera, who, like Brooke, was pregnant. On the verge of fulfilling his lifelong dream of being a gang hitman, Tyner now began to lose his nerve, wondering how he was supposed to pull off a robbery and murder with three women and Fierro still inside the home. He decided to lock himself into a bathroom and call Denny for assistance, who told him simply to get on with it. Then he heard gunshots coming from outside. Hogshooter and Cochran had arrived. What followed was complete pandemonium and chaos. Tyner alleges that when he exited the bathroom, Casey charged at him with an X-Acto knife. He shot Casey and then proceeded to shoot everyone in the house, except Fierro, who made a mad dash through the garage door as Tyner called after him to stop running. Fierro ran down the block to a cedar tree, climbed it, and hid there for another 45 minutes. Back at the house, Tyner and Hogshooter were taking their turns murdering people. Brooke had been shot in the head, an eye hanging out of its house, and stabbed repeatedly, but was still clinging to life when Hogshooter doused her in gasoline and then poured it around the rest of the house, where three other corpses lay. By all accounts, Brooke was still alive when the fire was set and the house effectively exploded. As the men left the area and reported back to Denny, they carried with them about $10,000 and Casey's skull necklace, much less than what Denny had expected to be there. The men split up the proceeds, and Denny took the necklace with him, and they agreed to lay low. In a final, inhumane act, he callously brought flowers to Casey's ill mother the same week of the murders. It may have seemed that they'd gotten away with it, but they forgot about Jose Fierro up in the cedar tree, and he wasn't planning on staying silent for long. One other thing about Denny Phillips: the man loved to brag. After the murders, he boasted to his girlfriend about what he'd done. In years to come, he would brag to inmates in federal prison. But for now, Denny, Hogshooter, and Cochran remained free. David Tyner had no such luck. He was picked up within 2 weeks of the massacre, charged with 6 counts of murder, 4 for each adult victim and 2 for the unborn babies of Brooke and Milagros. By 2012, he had pled guilty to avoid a death sentence. While he kept his mouth shut about who else might have been involved, The cops were fairly certain that it was the Indian Brotherhood war chief that many informants had told them Tyner had been working for. Adding to their suspicions was this. In the immediate aftermath of Diablo's murder, riots broke out between the Indian Brotherhood and Hispanic gangs in 3 different prisons across Oklahoma.
In the days following the murders of 6 people in this southwest Oklahoma City home last November, fights between rival gangs at 3 Oklahoma prisons took place. Several of the incidents involved Native American and Hispanic gangs. The suspect in the murder case, David Tyner, he's Native American. One of the victims, Casey Barrientos, is Hispanic.
So what does a man who is looking to get away with a sextuple murder do? For Denny Phillips, the answer was clear. You break into a Tulsa homicide detective's home and steal his guns. In late April of that year, he took firearms and easily identifiable heirlooms from the residence of Police Sergeant Mike Huff, then hid out in a nearby Motel 6 on South Garnett Road. The cops and federal agents closed in, making a hotel clerk call Denny's room with a ruse to get him out of the room where he was staying with at least one woman. The authorities' story is that Denny grabbed a pistol at his waistband and the cops opened fire, pumping shots into his stomach. He fell from what could have been fatal gunshots, but instead would lead to a hospital stay and then jail. By August 2012, just months after Tyner was sentenced to 6 life terms, Denny would be formally arrested at his federal prison cell in Terre Haute and brought back to Oklahoma to face 6 counts of murder. Then, in 2014, David Tyner surprised everyone. He abruptly decided that he would tell authorities what he knew about the massacre. He did so with no expectation for a reduced sentence, nor really any derived benefit to him. Except for one. A man known for his love of spinning webs and telling tales would now have a captive audience to tell a room full of interested onlookers about the most significant and horrible thing he'd ever done. His police interview led to charges against Hogg Shooter and John Cochran. In 2015, Cochran decided to plead guilty and join Tyner on the government's witness list. At the 2016 trial for Hogg Shooter and Denny, Tyner's nickname of "shit, that ain't nothing" took on a whole new meaning when he entered a courtroom and raised his right hand for what would probably be the last time ever outside of a prison facility. Quote, "I'm here for the families. I want them to know that I'm sorry for what I've done. I want them to have closure, know the truth," Tyner said. Then he launched into an extremely detailed and grotesque account of the murders. Another witness with a vivid story to tell was Kelsey Day, an ex-girlfriend of Denny, who recalled how, after the murders, Denny would flick the skull on Casey's old necklace and say, he got what he deserved. Denny's own account of the murders gave Kelsey nightmares, she said. Cochran, too, said he was still haunted by visions of Brooke begging for her life. Quote, "I'd been trying to get it out of my mind for the past 5 years." The trial featured extra security and numerous shady characters, one of whom told a wide-eyed jury that Denny had recounted specific details about the whole thing, and how 2, quote, "fucking pregnant bitches" were there, but, quote, "they had to go too just like everybody else." Attempts by the defense to shift blame onto Fierro and discredit Tyner and Cochran did not change the jury's mind. They convicted both men, but then shocked many by recommending against the death penalty. Dennis Hoff passed away in 2018, but expressed disappointment at the lack of a death sentence. He was hoping to attend their execution, calling Brooke's death, quote, "the saddest day in Bunny Ranch history," and had no sympathy for Tyner in light of his come-to-Jesus moment. He said, "I hope there's an afterlife so Tyner can burn in hell." As for the Indian Brotherhood, the gang has only grown bigger since that fateful early morning on November 9th, 2009. The long trail of IBH victims, from the Great Plains to the big city, has only grown too. But the memories of all these victims, killed for reasons that often defy logic or sense, are not soon forgotten. And as the IBH expands, so do the resources that the government seems ready to throw towards perhaps the distant hope of one day shutting it down for good.